So I am extremely excited for two reasons. One is it seems to be that we're making it towards the end of the semester and we're hosting our last event today together with the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies. I am Mateja Peter, one of the directors of the Center for Global Law and Governance, who is your co-host today. The second thing that I'm really happy about, actually it's three things that I'm happy about. So the second thing that I'm really happy about is the topic. So this is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. And for those of you in the audience that know me, you'll know that I've been working on sort of UN peacekeeping for over a decade now, that I've actually worked with sort of Pakistani military and police forces. And that peacekeeping is actually extremely important, and it's a good topic to end our semester on. For those of you that are my students, you'll know that I often say that the peacekeeping budget is basically twice the budget of the regular budget of the UN, right? So it tells you that it is, states actually think it is important. The other thing that is super interesting about this topic is that we're not just talking about peacekeeping, but we're talking peacekeeping from kind of two different perspectives as well. One is from a perspective of a major troop contributing country, which Pakistan is. I think at this point it's probably the fourth, fifth. It changes from month to month. But the interesting aspect is we have global South countries who tend to be kind of the foot soldiers, right, in the sort of the peacekeeping business, and it is always important to hear from their perspective, because quite often we're caught in our ivory towers talking to ourselves as sort of the global North expert. And then the second thing that is obviously very important is the gender aspect. So for those of you that have any experience with peacekeeping, that have seen how peacekeeping looks like, and especially if you've ever worked with the military or police in peacekeeping, you'll see that, you know, if you're doing research, and Roxani is now going to start nodding, is that when she goes and does research, she's probably one of the rare women there. Especially when working with the military and the police aspect. And so this kind of cross-section between peacekeeping, gender, and sort of Pakistan as one of the biggest troop contributor is the topic that we're going to be looking at today. And we have two extremely, I'm very happy, and that's the third thing I'm very happy about, excited about today, because our two speakers, or sort of the speaker and the discussant today, are both amazing experts on the topic we'll be looking at. So our guest of honor today is calling us from Pakistan, Marvi Memon, who is, and I will miss on sort of the impressive CV, and so please fill in on sort of the highlights of it. But Marvi is, among other things, a former federal minister of Pakistan for social protection, where she's worked on sort of the issues of development, child labor within the country in Pakistan. She's also a two-term parliamentarian. Was serving on the World Bank Gender Advisory Council, and among other honors also counts the Democracy Award of the UK House of Commons and the French President National Order of Merit. And okay, I forgot the whole name of it again, but she was also just recently appointed to the Advisory Council on World Bank for Social Inclusion Partnership or something similar, which she just informed us is basically like a Nobel award in her field. And if that is not enough, Marvi is also a very prolific writer who often writes on issues that she cares about and she works on, sort of from her experience, both domestically and internationally. And her latest book is exactly on the topic we're going to be looking at today, so Gender, Pakistan, and UN Peacekeeping. As a discussant, our second speaker is Dr. Roxani Krystalli, who I'm going to describe as, and I hope she's not going to squirm around that, as an academic practitioner. Because I think that's a really fantastic sort of way of looking at Roxani's work and engagement. She works in sort of feminist peace and conflict studies, and while most of us know Roxani as our academic colleague, or you might know her as your supervisor, as your lecturer, who works, and so Roxani works academically on the politics of victimhood in Colombia, basically asking who is a good victim, who makes for a good victim in sort of when it comes to sort of local international interaction. But Roxani also has over a decade of experience advising UN, NGOs on exactly these issues we're going to be looking at today, so gender, justice, and peace building. So we had a bit of a chat before we open up for the audience. And our plan for today is for our guest of honor to open with around sort of 25, 30-minute remarks, just sort of introducing her perspective on the topic, and we'll then follow with Roxani for around 10 minutes. But our plan is to have an open, freewheeling discussion, and so we would encourage you also to just pose questions as we go. If anything pops in your head, we'll bring it into a discussion later on. Okay, Marvi, I'm going to pass it to you, and I'll switch off the camera so that it's just the two of you on the screen.
Okay, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all. It's St. Andrews from Karachi, Pakistan. I'm very pleased to be with you on Zoom. I wish I'd been there in actual. I would have loved to see your premises and to meet all of you, but this is the new normal, and it's going to be like this for some time, so let's make the best of it. I wanted to say that as a Pakistani legislator, former cabinet member, UN peacekeeping is a subject which has always been very close to my heart, because Pakistan has, as you have mentioned, been a troop contributing country since the very inception of UN peacekeeping. And we have seen over the years how our troops and increasingly Pakistani female peacekeepers have been actively engaged in conflict zones, taking on the blue helmet responsibilities with pride, precision, persistence, and panache. As a former Minister for Social Protection with a focus on women empowerment, I have been actively involved with rebuilding lives of chronically poor, often in conflict zones. As such, in October 2020, I authored my fourth book, which was titled, like you mentioned, Gender, Pakistan and UN Peacekeeping. The objective really was to share my expertise on what I believed in my humble professional experience has worked, can work, and should be implemented in conflict zones to build back lives of those who matter the most, the marginalized, the vulnerable. Today, I will share some of these experiences with this august audience, especially since the peace-building gender reform agenda, as well as an assessment of how gender has been an increasing focus of the UN current leadership, is really, really key at the moment. Certainly, whilst the history of UN peacekeeping goes back to 1948, the gendered approach, I'm sure you who have studied this in detail, did take off with the famous UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on October 31st, 2000, which created a link between women, peace, and security. Similarly, there have been significant amount of UNSC resolutions post-UNSC 1325, which have tackled conflict-related sexual violence, addressed women's leadership in peacekeeping operations, and strengthened enforcement mechanism of the original UN Security Council Resolution 1325. Now we fast forward to 2020 and 2021, and we will see a tightened emphasis on gender mainstreaming by UN leadership. The question to ask is why? And the answer is fairly logical, simply because a gendered approach to peace building pays immense and immediate dividends for conflict resolution and the sustainability of peace. There's a complete agreement on the fact that women, when involved in peacekeeping at whatever level, will improve sexual gender-based violence indicators. Now, indicators because of their empathy, trust, they exude, versus the masculinity of the opposite sex. Moreover, their inclusion also leads to better intelligence gathering in local populations. They are most useful in post-conflict reconstruction efforts of legal and constitutional reforms, election preparation, mine reforms, and DDR, disarmament, demobilization, reintegration. Their inclusion in police helps manage local populations much better. The list of the gender dividends in peacekeeping is frankly endless. Therefore, it is no small wonder that the UN Secretary General has been quoted as saying that we must ensure full, equal, and meaningful participation of women in all stages of the peace process, and that we must systematically, I quote, integrate a gender perspective into all stages of analysis, planning, implementation, and reporting. In fact, the focus of UNDPO has been to achieve inclusive and sustainable peace outcomes in line with the Secretary General's famous Action for Peacekeeping Initiative, A4P. The DPO has also been at the forefront to turn women peace security commitments into reality through the Generation Equality Campaign. The Secretary General's words, I quote, "Women's leadership is a cause. We must make it a norm. That is how we will transform international peace and security," have indeed been at the cornerstone of this impetus on a gendered approach. At the same time, there is an important realization also by the Secretary General that while women are in the front lines brokering peace in local communities, they continue to be actively sidelined once those processes move to the national and international levels. It is important to understand, therefore, why the UN Peace Building Report of October 2020, coming at the 20th anniversary of the famous UN Security Council Resolution 1325, takes stock of hits and misses of 2 decades of gender performance, whilst clearly underlining certain focus areas which are critical for a gendered approach. Number 1, prioritize and invest in community-based local women's networks. Number 2, harness data and gender analysis for accountable decision-making. Number 3, accelerate and leverage women's mobilization to transform peace and political processes. Number 4, systemize women's leadership to inform conflict prevention and resolution, mediation and protection. Number 5, create dynamic and innovative partnerships to enhance women's participation. So, ladies and gentlemen, there is no doubt that the UN Secretary General and the UN DPO leadership can pride themselves in 2021 on certain achievements on the gender front. Primarily, women in leadership roles is being encouraged at all levels, whether at the UN leadership peacekeeping level, or the women peacekeepers in combat level, or the women in organizations assisting UN peacekeepers level, or simply in the post-conflict governments in conflict zones. This would mean that women members in local governments, national assemblies, or upper houses of parliament are being encouraged more and more in these conflict zones. Now, investments are also being made in community-based women's networks as equal partners. These networks are using innovative community approaches to resolving conflict, waging peace and reconciliation, especially in COVID decision-making, including the elevated advocacy for the United Nations Secretary General's global ceasefire call. Women's empowerment projects are being encouraged, and women from diverse backgrounds and communities are being brought under one platform to create cooperatives for improving livelihoods. These networks are assisting electoral voter registrations and increasing women voter turnouts. Identification and profiling of women ex-combatants has increased through these networks as well. UN peacekeepers have collaborated many a times with other UN agencies like UN Women, UNDP, and the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance to improve the legislative frameworks by success transfers and sharing learning experience from one conflict zone to another. Constitution drafting has been improved by these shared experiences too. On the challenge side, ladies and gentlemen, due to COVID, there have been many restrictions on women's movements, increase in violence against them, and decrease in their access to rescue, health, and essential services. They have also faced economic hardships in COVID as the civic space has shrunk with women's disproportionate exposure to COVID as frontline workers in the health sector. As such, the reform agenda I will propose today at your august university becomes even more important in this pandemic as cure, ladies and gentlemen, so that these challenges can be addressed. While some peacekeeping missions have better online facilities enabling bi-communal dialogue and trust-building work to continue, others simply don't. Cyprus and Kosovo are good examples of how women's organizations and walks moved to the virtual world like we are doing right now, and joint statements continued in that virtual zone. However, with low literacy and the digital divide, such option closed for some peacekeeping zones, and there the challenge had been greater in COVID. In zones like CAR, DRC, South Sudan, Mali, gender advocacy shifted to local radio stations and distribution of solar-powered radios to the women. So, with every challenge has come a set of solutions, thank God. Even though women are severely underrepresented in decision-making processes, the odd success stories of women parliamentary speakers being appointed, for example, in Kosovo, have encouraged other areas to start lobbying along the same lines. Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see from the above expose, the cure for a gendered-focused approach to peacekeeping and peace building has arrived already. What I wish to share with you in the next half is a further elaboration of how that cure can be fine-tuned and expanded, especially during the pandemic. The first cure is a focus on gender data management through household registries. One of my favorites because of the fact that I have a social protection background and expertise. Now, when large groups of people who are not identified on state household registries, either because they are nomadic or they are stationary but not accessible to government peace-building machineries, they become stateless and invisible to the state for all development purposes. We definitely need a cure. This aggravates the plight in conflicts. Demographics often become a source of political controversy in conflicts since they are key for resource allocation, which is always scarce. The cure needs to be credible, accurate, up-to-date, real-time, and complete data gathering of all households. There are many technologies which have already been tested on improving household registries for stationary as well as nomadic populations in these conflict zones. Thus, this cure technically exists. The challenge is to implement it where it is not being implemented. Whilst this cure can be considered costly, its development advantages outweigh the costs significantly since targeted efforts at developing those in need of development and assisting those stuck in the spiral of conflict can take place. Peace plans can be targeted to those who are identified versus those who are invisible. The first priority in these cases is to take women as head of households so that automatically they lead in peace processes and in development efforts in peace building. This creates a poverty and a prone to conflict scientific scorecard, which in turn can equalize distribution of limited funds in conflict zones, improve food subsidies, avoid duplication, and manage conflict resolution systems more efficiently. The second cure, ladies and gentlemen, is an active pursuit of a women empowerment legislative agenda in conflict zones. This cure is already being pursued in many peacekeeping missions, as mentioned above. What I'm proposing, however, is a prioritization of the following specific legislative agenda across the board. Number one, access to financial inclusion with e-commerce opportunities for conflict-prone, vulnerable, chronic poor. Number two, violence protection legislation, including asset crime control legislation, domestic violence, femicide, and honor killing legislation. Number three, climate smart livelihood and income generating legislations. Number four, legislation prohibiting early marriage. Number five, gender pay gap legislation. Number six, meaningful participation in democracy and decision-making through quotas legislation. Number seven, sexual harassment and women trafficking prohibitive legislation. Number eight, reproductive child and maternal health legislation. Number nine, psychiatric assistance legislation for survivors of conflict. Each one of them is really important. It's not in any particular order, but I believe that these nine need to be prioritized in every single conflict zone. So, ladies and gentlemen, there is enough evidence to suggest that the above 9-point legislative agenda is complete enough to handle women-empowered indicators in conflict zones because the issues identified by peacekeeping forces on ground necessitate action in all these specific areas that I have mentioned. The way to implement on fast track is to create a cell which looks at the legislative models that have worked in similar zones and success transfer without wasting time on reinventing the wheels. Legislative processes are cumbersome, and I can say that because as a former parliamentarian, twice parliamentarian, I can assure you that anywhere in the world they are cumbersome, not just in developed countries or developing countries, anywhere in the world. So legislative processes are cumbersome and complicated. Thus, an effort needs to be made to simplify the processes and to learn from those parliaments which have the most efficient legislative amendment processes. And finally, many zones are functioning in these conflict zones. Many of them are functioning in colonial era legal frameworks, which definitely need immediate updating. The third cure, ladies and gentlemen, is promoting the right health agenda, especially in the midst of the pandemic. I propose the following 5-point health plan. Number one, women and girls can be protected from disease and death by establishing suitable healthcare systems through coordination, collaboration of the relevant stakeholders prior to, during, and post-conflict. The solution for an equitable health service delivery is twofold: to strategically reduce those barriers for women and to increase healthcare worker motivation to enable better service delivery. Number two, It is important for peacekeeping missions to contribute to improved health systems for their affected populations by understanding the state of the healthcare, workforce, and systems of health financing in their territories. Number 3, those health information systems must be developed which are disaggregated on the basis of sex so that gender data is readily available and equal, equitable health services may be able to be provided. Number 4, equitable health financing on the basis of gender may include a firm action taken by the governments to regulate the health sector, especially in terms of price control, public financing of income and wealth on the basis of tax, and a progressive taxation to regulate and mobilize health resources. Number 5, disability cards should be distributed for the poorest women in conflict zones who have zero or little access to basic facilities in the COVID pandemic. The 4th cure, ladies and gentlemen, in implementing a strong implementing a strong 5-point uniformed poverty alleviation strategy across the board to ensure the following priorities are handled in conflict zones. Number 1, a distinct strategy to pursue the famous 3-pronged approach. And yes, this is coming from the World Bank, but many IFIs follow the same. Social safety nets, social insurance, and 3 labor market programs in all conflict zones with the assistance of all IFIs who are available on ground. Number 2, a payment system digitization and creation of innovative options to make sure that the outreach increases, the timing of the cash stipend improves, and the pilferage of the cash reduces. Number 3, address social protection product innovations to all SDGs to ensure that they are truly smart, tracked, monitored, and comparatively analyzed across conflict zones competitively, linking them to disbursement of grants from IFIs. Number 4, a healthy combination of what we call unconditional and conditional cash transfers to ensure the right motivation to exit poverty exists amongst the vulnerable communities living in conflict zones. Number 5, a large array of graduation from poverty products with economic inclusion models being implemented, which have been tried, tested, measured beforehand to produce the fastest livelihood and job creation force multipliers. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the 5th cure in this reform agenda is improving the election process in conflict zones through the following well thought out 5-point strategy. Number 1, an election reform agenda for each conflict zone devised by a high-level decision-making steering committee comprising of high-level election experts from the following organizations: Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, Department of Peace Operations, the UNDP, Office of Human Rights Commission, UN Volunteers, UN Office for Project Services, UNESCO, UN Women, IOM, Regional Electoral Observer Groups. Now, all of them are doing their little bit, but what I'm suggesting is they need to come together to do it together at a high level so that they cut down on duplication. Number 2, the specialization of services through the creation of best practice units in order to refocus the offering in conflict zones of the following: technical assistance, conducive environment creation, organizing electoral processes, certification, observation, supervision, expert promotion. Number 3, a model protocol and charter for ensuring the following. Number 1, increased voter participation, controlling false information, keeping women candidates safe in conflict zone, increasing peace messages, especially amongst the women, enhancing gender-sensitive election rules, and financial resource allocation for women candidates. Number 4, having a national sovereignty norm-based approach to electoral reforms, which ensures enhanced credibility by including women IDPs in election voting and as in election candidates. Number 5, having success stories demonstrating the age-old assumption that more women legislators in conflict zones or elsewhere will enable more pro-women legislation. The 6th and final cure in the gender reform agenda, ladies and gentlemen, is the execution of an improved sexual exploitation and abuse control policy through a focus on the following 10 key areas. Number 1, continued improved attitudes of UN senior leadership of DPO. 2, improved training within UN missions. 3, improved access to UN complaint system with feedback to local victims on process and strengthening systems for whistleblowers. Number 4, policy rhetoric to be substituted by policy practice. Number 5, increased women hiring, filling of gender position staffing, and appointment of gender watchdog ombudsman. Number 6, deterrence to SEA by ensuring certainty of punishment through quick, certain, and proportionate punishment. Number 7, termination versus repatriation of delinquent soldiers to close the circle fully on zero tolerance. Number 8, differentiated treatment to peacekeeping babies of a consensual versus exploitative and violent nature. Number 9, continued improvement of HIV rates amongst peacekeepers and host populations by active training, testing, pre-deployment, and post. And number 10, fixing the immunity loopholes by identifying inconsistencies within judicial systems, improving DNA testing, improving evidence gathering mechanisms, and increased recreational facilities, family hotlines, and aggressive patrolling. And now that I've gone through this, I would like to turn to a PowerPoint presentation which shows you Pakistan's involvement in peacekeeping. I'm very proud to show this to you. So I am now putting on my slides, and I would request you to kindly let me share this if you can. Okay, so Pakistan's contributions in UN peacekeeping missions is as follows. Here we go. You can see from this map, I'm not going to talk much on it. I just want you to just examine it and see exactly where we have contributed what. So in terms of infantry battalions, in terms of artillery regiments, in terms of artillery batteries, etc., which areas, whether it was Somalia, which years, Rwanda, Mozambique, you name it, Pakistan has been there, done its bit, more than its bit, in 4 continents, 28 countries, 46 missions with over 200,000 peacekeepers, and remain top 3. So it's top 3 troop contributors for 18 years. That's the recent, this number is actually from October. So you're right, it could have changed since then. Now, if you look at UN peacekeeping at a glance, countries contributing to peacekeeping, 128 countries, contributing troops, police, and civilian response, working with international partners. You can see who's who there. You can see the budgets. You were discussing budgets earlier, and logistics operation, etc. Pakistan's contribution is as follows. That's the amount of infantry battalions, 4 of them, engineer companies, aviation units, 1 level 2 hospital, 4,509 field personnel, including military and police, peacekeeping missions since 1960, 46 missions, 28 countries, current deployment in 9 missions, 15 across the globe. Largest contingent that Pakistan has is in DRC, and that's 1929 personnel. Now the equipment I'm sharing with you, this is all data coming to you, and I'm sure the researchers would be happy with this. It's in the book as well. Let's look at the current deployment contingents, military observers and staff officers. You can see whether it's Cyprus, Kosovo, Western Sahara, where we have who exactly. So I'm just going to let you take this information in, and you can go through this slide yourself without me really talking to you. But as you can see, Pakistan is kind of all over and is doing good. Now, in terms of UN deployment summary, these are, and I share with you the female numbers as well, which is what today's conversation has been about. You can see who's who at different levels, at the different peacekeeping missions, how many women are there, how many male members are there, at the staff officer level, at the military observer level. It's all there, this information. And so top 6 troop contributor countries, this was October 2020 data, might have changed since then, but this is our little pie of the chunk of the pie, and our total number, like I said, was 4509 at that point. Now, we have given sacrifices for peace. 157 Pakistani peacekeepers, including 24 officers, have been martyred. And here are some of their photographs, men we have lost from different, and some have received the Dag Hammarskjöld medal on 24th May 2019 as such. 98 Pakistani peacekeepers have been awarded this medal as such. And now let's talk about the Pakistan Women in Blue Helmet. Gender mainstreaming was core agenda of the London Ministerial Summit in 2016. The Secretary General directed to appoint more women, as you can see. So that was a milestone in 2020. 83 female officers of Pakistan have been deployed so far. Very pleased and proud to report this to you, whether it's at the military observer staff officer level, contingent member levels, training of female officers, the kind of training that is going on at the International Peacekeeping Training Institute, the kind of training that's going on in our capital, Islamabad, at the Center for International Peace and Stability, and deployment of female engagement teams as well. You can see that. Now, I would like to end. Let's hope that I can end and get back to that pretty much takes me to the end of my presentation. And I am now ready for questions and answers. Or however, I think it's you, Roxani, next, right? Is that right?
That is correct. Thank
Okay.
you. If you just close the PowerPoint and click Stop Sharing Screen, that should get us out of where you are.
Have I done it? Not yet?
Yes,
Fantastic.
there you go.
Yeah. That's
Great,
it.
super.
Roxani, obviously this was a tour de force with a big agenda that Marvi presented. And so I would suggest you just pick up 2 or 3 things that you feel that you're most passionate about and sort of looking into. But there was a lot, sort of everything from interaction between international actors and local processes, sort of internal processes and sort of peacekeeping and peace building more broadly, intergovernmental cooperation. So, and you know, as we always say, like, feel free to share your own stories that will ground the discussion a tiny bit better.
Super. Thank you so much, Mateja and Adam, for putting this event on, and Jenny for all your support in making it a reality. And most of all, thank you to our guest of honor, Marvi. What a treat it was to read your book and to listen to your words and engage with them. I'd also like to say hello and a very warm welcome to our audience, and to remind you to please be posting questions and reactions as we speak, and we'll pick them up. So don't just wait for the Q&A. As Mateja beautifully prefigured, what I'm going to do is pick up on just a couple of points that Marvi made, and then tell you a few stories from my own experience and having worked as a gender advisor in both peacekeeping and peace building regarding what Marvi's excellent points look like on the ground. So what does it mean to try to put this into action? What are the barriers? And as Marvi herself flagged, what are the promises? So what are a couple of things I would love for us to be thinking about? The first is, how do we make the argument for a gender perspective to peace building? And Marvi really drew out 2 ways to make the argument. One of them is the strategic way, by looking at the data that suggests a gender perspective to peace building and the inclusion of women in peacekeeping. And those 2 are not the same, a gender perspective and inclusion of women actually lead to better peacekeeping outcomes for a range of actors, not just for women. And that's a strategic argument because we're saying if you do this, you will succeed at your overall peacekeeping goals in more holistic ways than if you don't. And then there's the normative argument. And a lot of you who are students in my feminist modules, and I'm delighted to see you in the audience, will have heard me make this sometimes, that a gender perspective is the right thing to do. And those arguments are often at tension with each other because not everyone agrees on what a gender perspective is or what its value is, and some people actively resist it. So the first thing I invite our audience to think about is, how do these arguments, the normative argument and the strategic argument for a gender perspective, work both together and at tension with each other? What is it that we gain from making a strategic argument, but also what is it that we lose from making a strategic argument when it comes to this kind of perspective? The second point I wanted to make is to reflect on what is it that women bring to peacekeeping missions, and what is it that a gender perspective brings to peacekeeping missions. Again, acknowledging that the two are not the same. So what is it that women themselves, as peacekeepers, bring to the field? Women are able to talk to different members of the population when they're on the ground than male peacekeepers are, and about different topics. So a lot of the jobs that I have held in the past have had to do with the documentation of gender-based violence. And in a lot of the places in which I have worked, in Sudan, in Uganda, in Guatemala, people will not speak to a male peacekeeper about gender-based violence. They will deny that it happened, or they're just not comfortable reporting it. So don't just think of it through the lens of political correctness or propriety. Think about who can actually speak to people about what they're going through during conflict and in its aftermath in ways that capture a totality of experiences. I suggested that what women themselves bring to peacekeeping is not the same as what a gender lens brings to peacekeeping. And to answer what does a gender lens bring to peacekeeping, we need to start by acknowledging, and I'm sorry, I'm getting a bit of echo, so if someone's not muted, it would be ideal if you could be. Thank you so much. What a gender lens brings to peacekeeping is best understood by saying what women don't bring. Women's inclusion in peacekeeping does not succeed because women are naturally peaceful or naturally kinder or don't participate in war. Those are all fallacies, and they actually really hurt us. Because if we say women are naturally peaceful, we fail to understand, for example, the experiences of women combatants who joined armed groups either by force or voluntarily. And also, if we say that women are naturally peaceful, we're also not making a particularly feminist argument regarding the skills that we bring, right? And one of my favorite quotes about this comes from the feminist scholar Carol Cohn, who my students have read. And she says, women are more than a womb in the room. So when we make the argument for why women should be included, it should not be the kind of argument that reduces women to their ethereal nature or their peaceful nature. And I really appreciated the ways in which Marvi drew this out. So what does a gender perspective bring? And here I'll highlight one opportunity, which is that a gender perspective is not just about the lives of women. Many of you will know I have done a lot of work in support of the peace process in Colombia since 2010. And when I have shown up, particularly to work with combatants, including in non-state armed groups, and said, hi, I'm the gender advisor for the United Nations or whichever organization I'm supporting at the time, the commanders will say, yes, 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 let's get you the women combatants to talk to, as though the only people the gender advisor would be interested in are the women combatants. But I'm actually also interested in men as gendered subjects. What ideas about gender, about livelihoods, about protection, about being a good man drove people into war? And how do those ideas drive people out of war as well and affect their willingness to demobilize and be part of peace or resistance to peace? And I've seen Dr. Jeremy McMullen in the audience from the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies, which co-sponsored this event, and his work really beautifully speaks to that. So I hope we can also take away that gender work is not just about the lives of women. And the last point that I'll close on is has to do with gender work not just being women's work. I have often been in the room, and when the conversation turns to gender, all the other men in the room say, yes, right, we'll now turn to Roxani. But if what we're saying is that gender improves the overall effectiveness of a peacekeeping mission, then the only people speaking about gender, doing research on gender, doing the work of gender should not be women. And in order to get to that point, we really need to dismantle resistances to gender work, dismantle myths about gender work. And I'm hoping that Marvi and I can speak in the Q&A a little bit about why. My closing note as part of this point is about the subjects of peacekeeping. Some of you will have read texts that describe them as the peace kept, which is a term that I have mixed feelings about. But very often resistance to gender doesn't just come from our organizations or parliamentarians or senior decision makers. It comes from people on the ground where the peacekeeping missions are taking place. And so thinking about what does gender mean in the particular community in which peacekeeping operations are taking place. And it never means one thing. People don't agree about the meaning of gender. What do people think a gender perspective can bring? And crucially, what are they afraid of? What I've often heard them be afraid of is, you foreign women will bring feminism over here and destroy our families, for example. They're afraid of foreign intervention. They're afraid of international intervention contravening community norms and traditions that a lot of people hold dear. And there are really excellent responses to those fears. And I'm really going to invite especially the students in the audience to ask about them. What do you say when someone says, why is a Greek woman like you standing in Colombia and telling us what to do with our women? But I want to flag that the fear is real, and we cannot just dismiss it as backward or patriarchy or sexism, even if it can be all of the above. But the fear informs how people engage or disengage with gender in ways that I think we really ought to take seriously. For this reason and many others, I really treasured hearing Marvi's really thorough remarks. And I think the thoroughness of parliamentarians is something we can learn from. A lot of the students in the audience talk about how theory often feels so removed. And she really gave us a crash course on how do you make this real? How do you make it actionable? What does it actually look like to do this work in a 17-point plan? And so I hope you will all appreciate the thoroughness and the work that goes into this, and that you'll join me in thanking Marvi and engage with us in the Q&A. Feel free to ask either of us questions about any aspect of this and to join in the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roxani. So I have plenty of questions for both of you, but I'll sort of issue another invitation. You're welcome to either type the comments, or if you feel more comfortable, you can also raise your hand and just ask it that way. We're a relatively small group, so I think it should be fine if you speak, just as long as you remember that we are recording the session. So the question that comes to me, and it's a big question that both of you were kind of raising and pointing out, is at sort of this dynamic between local and international, even though the dichotomy doesn't always work, right? And a big critique, and this is sort of a standard critique that both of you have known and mentioned, this kind of very top-down approach coming from a lot of international agency, whether that being peacekeepers and or then sort of more peace building developmental aspect. And I wanted us to sort of switch to sort of the peacekeeping aspect of it, because that does tend to be very militarized, right? And it is militaries. And so if you remember sort of even seeing Marvi's presentation, the casualties were men, the numbers were very sort of men heavy, right? And so what does that in your kind of narrative or as solutions mean for who peacekeepers listen to and how peacekeeping actually shapes as an activity? So it's a big question, so just feel free to pick up on either of it. And I'll pass it to Marvi first, just to sort of give us sort of a perspective from sort of possibly from Pakistan on sort of how this has worked out.
Sadly, no, it is a big question. And I think the focus has been more and more on the UN Security Council Resolution 1325. It has been 20 years, let's not forget. And this whole debate has been going on actively. And I use the word active, and I think Roxani will agree with me, actively versus it's been there for a long time, but actively since 20 years. And the focus has been more and more so, and countries, specifically I, as a Pakistani former, cabinet member, I know as a fact that this has been more and more of an increased focus with us, that we're not just sending peacekeepers, we are sending women as well within that whole contingent. Of course, one thing which is not Pakistan specific, but one thing which perhaps has not been mentioned in such detail is that unfortunately, and I am saying this is not Pakistan specific, this is generally, unfortunately, women peacekeepers are not necessarily sent to the most dangerous of the areas to protect them perhaps, whereas in fact they are required to be sent to the most problematic areas so that they can actually resolve the most problematic issues in the fastest, shortest possible time because of certain key skills that they do have. And I liked the way Roxani was mentioning that, that there's certain perceptions about women. Let's not just reduce ourselves to those perceptions. But the fact is that they are more needed in those zones. So now there is a different perspective on this. Now there is more debate on this. Now there is more within, I know as a fact that within my country that they are being sent into zones, and they are proudly saying that, yes, we are sending them into difficult areas because we believe we will get the best value in terms of that they are needed there and that they will perform. There is no question of the performance angle. There used to be a question of the protection angle, but now more and more so women are, and they're being projected more and more so. So for my book, for those of you who have seen it, there's an entire chapter written by 3 women peacekeepers from Pakistan, which gives you their perspective. And those are stories that they have shared, and they have been in the worst of areas, in the most difficult of areas, and they have performed. So I think the answer to your question is the more we expose and project such women at all levels. Remember, I drew this comparison at different levels. So it's the UN leadership level, absolutely no two ways about it. More women as special reps to the United Nations Secretary General on peacekeeping, more women at police levels. We have seen police contingents, and Roxani will agree that there have been countries which have sent only women as policing. So no mix, just women. So what I'm trying to say is the more you include them physically at every single level, not just at the IFI level, not just at the development partner level, but seriously at the combatant level, and then project their good work and then talk about their good work. I think that would be a start, if you like.
Right, Roxani.
Thank you so much, Mateja, for that brilliant question. And Marvi, I really want to draw out the importance of that chapter in your book. Women peacekeepers are often written about, but do not get to tell their own stories on their own terms. So I think that's a really significant contribution of your work. To Mateja's question, I would offer 2 thoughts. First of all, the fact that more men are killed in peacekeeping missions is also a gender data point. Hugo Slim, many, many years ago, had written that more men are killed in war, but more women die. And women often die of famine, of disease, of the long-term impacts of armed conflict, whereas men died on the battlefield. And I'm putting that in quotes because the idea of the battlefield has really shifted in recent years. So I think gender analysts should take seriously the gendered nature of killings as well as part of their data, as opposed to saying, oh, it's not women, therefore this is not part of our portfolios. And to the second component of Mateja's excellent question, this clash between international ideas and local ideas. I'm really inspired by the work of the feminist scholar Cynthia Enloe, whom many of my students read in my modules. And one thing she says is never assume that the place in which you're working does not also have its own ideas about gender, such that they need to be imported. So as I mentioned, I've done a lot of work in Colombia. And when I work in rural areas, Colombians will say, oh, these ideas were brought here from Bogota. And even though Bogota is in the same country and is arguably local, it's still seen as importation from a geographic center or the urban center to the periphery. And so the first question I ask when I do this work and meet this kind of resistance on the international local tension is, who are the Colombian feminists and gender analysts making these arguments? How are they making these arguments? Are they making the normative one? Are they making the strategic one? Do they use the language of feminism, or do they know that it's better in this context not to? And what can I learn from their language and their strategies in being more successful? Because knowing that they exist allows me to amplify their work and allows me to tell other Colombians, look, it's your own compatriots who are advancing these arguments rather than blaming the internationals for bringing them in.
If I may just add to that, thank you, Roxani. I just wanted to add one thing on that, is that when you talk about international local, of course, there's international training which is happening, and Roxani is more than, she's the one who's been part of that more than anyone else. But then there's an adaptation of all that international SOPs of the UN to local on-ground situations. And that, as far as, Pakistan is a true contributing country. I know as a fact that both of them happen. Like I gave you an example, there's training happening at Islamabad, for example, there's training happening at the International Center, the UN, then there's regional trainings happening. So what I'm trying to say is that it's a combination of all of those, the international, the regional, the true contributing countries training, and finally, when you take all three of them and then you put them in the local perspective of that particular conflict zone, all three of them have to merge to make sense in that particular zone. So not one size fits it all. It cannot, because cultures are different, and there needs to be an appreciation of the fact that this has to fit in that particular culture. So often we have seen that certain things which are internationally spoken of might not fit in that local culture. So really, there's a lot of how can I say it? It's on the job. Training, it's on the job fixing and fitting the SOPs to what would work best on ground, looking at that particular conflict zone. Because like you said, if you have X number of peacekeeping missions, everyone will have their own concepts of what would work from a gender point of view.
Excellent points again. So I just realized that we have an additional technological challenge. So if you've been typing your questions in the chat, apparently I can't see them. And so Adam has raised, so please do raise your hand and just ask them like that, because it does seem that they're not going through. Adam has a question.
Thanks, Mateja, and thanks, Marvi, and to Roxani for just, I think, a fantastic discussion. And I wanted just to raise maybe a question, particularly for Marvi, although I think Roxani will have views on this as well. And just by way of background, I'm often quite interested in questions about status in international relations, and particularly like sort of how status is perceived by different actors. And so, Marvi, I was wondering if you have any insights when you think about Pakistan's major contributions to peacekeeping over time, whether in your experiences domestically, and I mean here in terms of government, but perhaps also more broadly, whether there's a sense of status attached to that. That is to say, being a major peacekeeping contributor is perceived domestically within government, maybe outside of government, as being something of value internationally. It adds a certain amount of status for the country. And if that's the case, I wonder also then if that has a gender dimension. That is to say, the very fact that Pakistan sees itself as contributing positively to some of these gender discussions would be another dimension of some kind of international status. Maybe I'm overinterpreting, but certainly when I sort of think about these things, that's often maybe part of the way I perceive it. So I'd be just interested in your thoughts on that. And thanks very much indeed.
Yeah, certainly. Status is huge, and especially as a former parliamentarian, former cabinet minister, that is the one thing that we would always be projecting, that we are proud that we have been contributing to UN peacekeeping missions for decades and decades. And this is something that is projected internally, and we try and project it internationally as well. Now, there's always, internally it's very clear that, any government that comes in, whichever government that comes in, they will always take up this issue and say, this is where our troops are, this is how they're contributing, this is where we've sent our people, this is what But whether the return on the investment, now this is something that every troop contributing country will come up with, is that, do we get the kind of recognition? And when I use the word recognition, I mean to say, do we kind of get the same place on the table, on the decision-making table, as we are contributing? So if we're contributing X, are we therefore being given the same high-level leadership positions? There's always going to be an issue with that, and there's always going to be a kind of a question mark raised that we have given X, we have done so much, but we are perhaps not receiving back enough in terms of international recognition. So yeah, status is there, but do we get a place on the table when decision-making is happening, and especially from a gender perspective? So now, hopefully, this is changing, and I'm one of the optimistic ones out there. And I feel that, yes, Pakistan's contributions have been internationally accepted. There's no doubt about that. And I hope that there will be more of of us at certain high-level decision-making places within UN peacekeeping, so that therefore then it's not just a troop contributing country, because you either have funds that you're contributing or your troops that you're contributing. But then who's getting a place on the table for decision making? It needs to be, it needs to work, it needs to be fair as a system. So there's always that little situation going on. And like I said, I'm positive going forward.
I am sure Roxani has thoughts on sort of the power dynamics on this as well, and possibly even looking at sort of further down the line into the peace building, or sort of how the different countries are contributing down the spectrum, because we tend to focus on the fact that there's kind of a troop contributor versus financier division in peacekeeping, but obviously peace building then persists, and so possibly give us some reflections on that as well.
Absolutely. And I'll reiterate while I speak Mateja's earlier point about the chat function not working. I checked and there's a little Teams outage. So if you typed we can't see it, raise your hands and you don't have to wait for the previous person to be done. We can call in a few people at a time. So I'll actually take Adam's question through a gender point of view. So is there status associated with being a leader on gender in UN peacekeeping and at that sliding peacekeeping, peace building nexus that Mateja talked about? And the Women, Peace and Security agenda, on which I've done quite a bit of work, is sort of hoping there is. That is to say, the drafters of the Women, Peace and Security resolutions and the implementers of them are hoping that they can convince countries that owning the Women, Peace and Security agenda and being a leader on women, peace and security will be something they're proud of, and that there will be rewards with that. That has had mixed success, because it is a really tough agenda to implement. As Marvi said, it is really expensive work in terms of both money and human lives. And so it is something that people have tried to get countries to embrace and to say it will be great to be seen as a leader on this for the sort of soft diplomacy benefits you can all imagine. But there are also real barriers on it. And if this is a question that interests you, I really recommend my colleague, Dr. Laura Shepard's book, Gender, UN, Peacebuilding and the Politics of Space, where she really talks about how do we build pride around gender work? And how do we get that pride to translate into funding, into troops, but also into more than troops, moving into peace building and into the more civilian dimensions? So thank you for that.
Great, fantastic. Haley is one of our fellows, so the floor is yours, Haley.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much for this talk today. It's really interesting. My husband is actually attached to MINUSMA in northern Mali right now, so I'm much more interested in peacekeeping at the moment than ever. I'm trying to think how to phrase this question a little bit, but there are some, at least perceived failures in peacekeeping, right, where in terms of protecting local populations, that really hasn't occurred in some instances. And I've been reading that, one of the troubles there is that troop contributing countries across the board often have caveats that go with their troops, where they can go, what times of day, things like that. And so when it comes to fast decisions that are needed to protect populations in sort of rapidly evolving situations, sometimes it's complicated because the line of command sort of goes around the UN back to each capital of each sort of troop contributing country. So in terms of doing a better job at protection, and I was really struck, this comment about, who's killed in war versus who dies, to be better at protection, it seems to me that, some of what you're talking about, the positive influence from women on this whole picture needs to be in national capitals as well. And it's hard to tell if these decisions, if these lines of commands back to national capitals of troop contributing countries go to the military or to politicians or to whom. So it seems like quite there's sort of this domestic side on each troop contributing country where you need that gender lens in other places that also affects peacekeeping. So I was wondering if you could sort of comment on that a little bit.
Great point. Marvi, do you want to pick it up? It's a big point.
No, it's a really important point, in fact, and there used to be, I think, a lot more of these coordination problems earlier. And I think Roxani, who studied this a lot more from an academic point of view, will agree that the UN recognized that, by the time that the decisions were taking place between New York, the local conflict zone, and then the troop contributing countries' own command structures, and a lot of time was perhaps being lost. So I think processes have improved. That is the distinct impression I have received from the data I have gone through, that the UN is completely aware of this problem, and therefore they have changed and their standard operating procedures in such a way that there's better coordination, faster coordination, that everyone is supposedly meant to be kept in the loop as much as is possible. And I say that, in quotes. It is a conflict zone at the end of the day. It is not, you're functioning under time deadlines, you're functioning under different time zones. And it's a really important question coming from someone whose spouse is on ground facing these kind of problems. But there is a structure within each peacekeeping mission, which is very clear-cut. There's no confusion. So whenever there's a military involved, the good news is that there is a structure, and that structure has to be followed. And there's a force commander. There's Roxani will go into the details of the kind of structure that exists. And so there is a very definite method to the madness, and that aspect of who is commanding at what level, and the fact that there are senior UN leadership people sitting on ground in each conflict zone, managing UN headquarters and managing troop contributing countries. I mean, that is the entire operation. That is what makes it the entire operation. But I can say with great surety that, yes, perhaps decades back, there was lack of coordination, but now things have definitely been more, I would say, don't like to use the word regimented, but certainly identified, and have become a bit more, the standard operating procedures are clearer, and troop contributing countries are clear, perhaps a lot more clear now than before. And like I said, whether it's the special reps to the UN Secretary General or the force commanders, they act in unison. They have to act as one team. They are part of a team. They know who their reporting lines are to. There is no confusion on reporting lines. If there was a confusion, there wouldn't be much of a military operation going on. So that's the good news, that there's no blurred, that there is a particular structure but yes, on ground. Does it get followed? I mean, that's a different question.
It's a great question to Roxani as well, and I think it's a bigger question, right? Because as soon as peacekeepers start taking on more protection mandates, it's a bit more difficult to function sort of in a normal military command, and sort of this tension probably comes out even more obviously. Roxani, pick it up.
100%. Thank you for that excellent question, Hallie. And I can only imagine your husband's experience with MINUSMA. It's both a very exciting time to be there and a very challenging time to be there. And so I'd be interested to hear more about it. I think Marvi did a brilliant job of answering the operational component of the question. So I'll pick up on the second, the shadow component of what counts as a peacekeeping death. And the data aspect, that's actually really political and really interesting. So there's been a lot of work done recently to think about the fact that peacekeepers die in ways that are not necessarily direct mission killings. And COVID-19 is actually a really important example. And we're seeing some of this at the protection of civilian sites in South Sudan, where you see peacekeepers dying of the pandemic, but while being there in their professional capacity, and they wouldn't have otherwise been there had it not been for the pandemic. And my favorite feminist anthropologist, Sally Mary, says data and indicators are political. That is what gets counted, how it gets reported, how it gets counted is not just a question of this many people died, the end. People have incentives to keep certain numbers low or to make gender engagement seem very high. And I think what we're seeing, especially with the changing nature of peacekeeping and the changing nature of war, are real questions around documentation. And it's not as straightforward as it used to be, for example, in the Bosnia days, not that it was ever straightforward, to count peacekeeping killings, particularly in the pandemic. And so I think the question you're raising is also a question about space. Where does peacekeeping take place? It's a question about harms. Which harms to peacekeepers are immediately legible and which less so? It's a question about the politics of indicators, which I just discussed. And it's also a question about the horizons over which we keep our eyes on peacekeeping, because measuring casualties of peacekeepers is actually a pretty short-term horizon, but measuring the long-term effects, peacekeeper suicide because of mental health issues while on mission. As Marvi said, peacekeeper health effects in the long run, lack of access to healthcare while on mission, meaning higher rates of cancer among certain peacekeepers because they weren't detected while they were in the field. Do we count those deaths as part of peacekeeper deaths? If this is a question that interests you, I also recommend Tom Gregory's work in New Zealand on counting casualties and the politics of counting casualties, not just in peacekeeping, but more broadly. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Roxani. I just merged your first and last name together. So as we wait for further questions, and I'm sure you're just itching to die, it's usually easier because it's in chat and people are a bit shy to possibly go on camera, but do not feel shy to do it. I'm just going to throw out a topic that Marvi raised and kind of ask for your thoughts on what's been done and sort of what can be done about sexual exploitation of peacekeepers in the field, and whether you're seeing things going in the right direction, whether with sort of increasing sort of militarization that we're seeing in peacekeeping, we might be turning back the clock. But just any thoughts that you can share, either from your own work or sort of from sort of broader thinking. Thank you.
Which one of us was it, me or Marvi?
I'll pass it to Marvi so that you get a bit of a break, Roxani.
No, actually, since I've already gone through my 10-point agenda for SEA, let's hear Roxani first, and then I would like to comment on that, because I have one whole chapter of the 4 chapters, 4 parts of the book, which is on this. And you've seen that. And then I described within my expose the 10 key points which I feel need to be fixed. Well, not fixed, but improvements are required on those 10 points. So I would really like to have Roxani's thoughts on those, perhaps 10 points, or whatever that from an academic practitioner's point of view.
Great, thanks, Roxani. Then.
Absolutely. So I'll start where I actually ended on the previous question on the politics of data. The data on sexual exploitation and abuse by peacekeepers, so of civilian populations, and also within peacekeeping forces, so peacekeepers themselves by others, is dramatically underreported. And there are incentives for people not to report. So I think we need to be very, very careful when we're quoting the data on reflecting on the relationship between data and experiences of violence. The second insight for me is that it really reminds us that the people who are there to keep the peace or build the peace can also create harm. And it reminds us not to idolize peacekeepers as do-gooders or assume that they are exempt from critique. Just as we think in wartime that there is such a thing as the victim-perpetrator binary, and someone could be a victim of some kinds of harms and a perpetrator of others, that is also the case with peacekeepers. It is possible to contribute to establishing aspects of a peace at a place and to enact gender-based violence at the same time. And the idolization of peacekeepers or silencing of gender-based violence within peacekeeping forces does not serve the cause of eradication of gender-based violence. The third point that I would make is to look more broadly than the peacekeepers themselves and then the troops. A lot of that gender-based violence happens by support staff. And this is true of humanitarian missions as well, right? Not just peacekeepers. So think about drivers, security guards, the very same people who are meant to protect you can be the violators and the perpetrators of other kinds of harms. And so thinking really broadly about the peacekeeping ecosystem as going beyond the troops and thinking about how are each of those actors both contributing to the protection of local populations and at the same time potentially violating them. And then finally, I think this really affects relationships between peacekeepers and the communities in which they operate. Haiti is a very good, very tragic example when peacekeepers, peace builders, humanitarian forces are known to enact that kind of violence on local populations and deny it or silence it or stop the process of its documentation and block access to justice, then it actually becomes impossible for them to fulfill their original mission and to be well received. So I really welcome the points that Marvi made as real steps to ending this kind of impunity and invite us to think beyond this victim-perpetrator binary to really get at all the aspects of this problem.
Thank you, Roxani. Marvi, can I push you a bit on sort of how you think, realistically looking, sort of your proposal to sort of empower whistleblowing within international organizations, right? So where do you see that there's advocates for that? How could these things be? Because we do know that whistleblowing for these things would actually be sort of beneficial, yet, you know, the number of stories we have of whistleblowers themselves being then sanctioned are tremendous. And so do you think it is realistic to expect that this is something that could be implemented properly within the UN itself?
You know, the first point that I made was continuing improved attitudes of UN senior leadership. So I think really that matters the most. Because if the most senior leadership in that particular peacekeeping mission is very committed to taking action against SEA, then the chances of people getting away with it are much lower. So I will continue to, I have purposefully put that as number one. And then, yes, whistleblowers, there is a problem. For example, if you say, let's put more women in this peacekeeping mission and therefore the numbers of SEA will come down. No, it's not a given, because women perhaps will not want to be whistleblowers because they might not want to be seen as the odd ones out. As it is, they're doing a job, which is, as it is, they're trying to fit into a particular system. And if they're seen as the ones who are doing the whistleblowing and they are targeted for that, so sometimes perhaps they would not be keen on taking on the brunt of this whistleblowing as such. And then protection to these to the whistleblowers, that really, like I said, depends on each peacekeeping mission. Of course, the policies are there. The UN is super clear on what needs to be done. So there's no confusion. I would say there is absolutely no confusion in terms of the policies. It is a question of how it is implemented on ground. And when you have, again, the question is, I think you will agree that those gender positions exist on paper, but often are the last to be filled in certain peacekeeping missions. So it's not just, you can't just pay lip service to it. You need to have gender watchdog ombudsman. It's not, oh, it's good to have one and let's have one when the peacekeeping mission is nearing its end. No, it's something that needs to be done right at the beginning. Just like, these appointments that are made, the women hiring that is done, it needs to be done fast. And then I think there are issues, of course, which have been resolved. There's the Zaid report that everyone's very familiar with on this particular issue. That gives a very good format as to how things need to be improved. But there are problems of DNA testing as well. And how fast and where is the evidence? Where is the evidence coming from? How are the legal components all joined together? Because you are functioning in different legal zones as such. You have the conflict zone, you have the troop contributing country zone, you have the UN zone, you have different zones. So the legal experts need to be really, really up the curve and to ensure that that the evidence does move fast. Because if the evidence does not move fast, the evidence is lost. And if the evidence is lost, there's no recourse, there's no action taken. And finally, something that I think everyone will agree on, this repatriation business needs to end. determination needs to kick in quite a bit. Because when you are repatriating, what you're doing is you're saying, okay, let's move this person. This person has committed certain crimes. Yeah, let's send him elsewhere. That's not resolving an issue. So all of these things, I mean, you know, and then when I was studying this in great detail, and I was going through this data in great detail, there is a very, very different concept of peacekeeping babies, which are consensual, which is two people who decide to get together and therefore have a baby together within the local population from peacekeeper and local population, or if it's exploitative, or if it is truly violent in nature. But the recourse is perhaps not so simple. So there are, I wouldn't say there are loopholes, I would just say there's room for improvement on this, certainly. And the good news is that the UN systems are not complacent on this. Perhaps 3 decades back, there wasn't much talk of it, and then it all blew up, and then action was taken, reports were commissioned, and continuously more and more is being done on this. But again, it's simple things, really. It's simple things like you wouldn't, you know, simple things like increased recreational facilities, family hotlines, aggressive patrolling. I mean, there's a whole list. I mean, there's a whole chapter on this. So for me to go through each one of them is difficult in 5 minutes. But like I said, the UN has done tremendous work on this and is trying to keep the systems, you know, between the troop contributing countries and the UN headquarters. There is a definite let's just say there's more information sharing now than there used to be earlier. And that is critical, that it's real time, it happens fast. Otherwise, it's lost, it's gone. There's no evidence left and there's no action then which can be taken. And again, this immunity problem that we have perhaps not touched upon. There's zero tolerance on this. There cannot be any immunity issues on this. So since there's a zero tolerance policy, those immunity questions then, you know, that is also an issue.
Great. I see Roxani sitting on the edge of her seat. So I'll give you 1 minute because then Jana's going to save us.
that was what I was going to say, that there's one more audience question that I'd love to take before we wrap up.
Yeah. So Jana, you saved us. So I have a list of questions that I could still go through, but we'll let you give us the last big closing question. No pressure.
No pressure. That's not easy. Thank you so much for this interesting discussion. I was just wondering, because we talked so far much on women within this gender perspective, but I was wondering which role maybe also other minorities would play within the gender perspective. Yeah, maybe you have some ideas or thoughts on that too.
Roxani, do you want to take on the intersectional lens first, and then we'll pass it to Marvi to close?
Absolutely. And Jana, feel free to email me. There's an excellent article on this by my colleague Maria Martín de Almagro, who essentially says that one of the failures of how intersectionality is conceptualized within the UN system is it's sort of in silos. Here is a box for gender. Here's a box for sexuality, much smaller box if it exists at all. Here is maybe a box for race. And for those of you who are fluent in the feminist concept of intersectionality, the point is to understand intersecting oppressions and how power operates upon people in intersecting ways, not to treat these identities in boxes. So for better or for worse, gender has received much more attention than all of these other dimensions. And attention is not just a rhetorical matter, it's funding. It's, you know, there are gender advisors, but to date, not really race advisors in the UN, though goodness knows the organization could certainly use them. And then the second way in which this really manifests in people's lives is people receive training in isolation. And I've really seen it in my work in Colombia, that the people who work on gender receive different training, have different bureaucratic forms, sometimes different offices in different parts of town than the people who work on, for example, ethnicity with Afro-Colombians or indigenous populations. So what this means is if you're an Afro-Colombian woman trying to access services, either peacekeeping support in the olden days, although Colombia is not quite a site of it, or peace building support now, you would have to do double the effort to get each aspect of your identity and experience attended to, because people don't speak those vocabularies fluently in the same body, at the same institution, with the same bureaucratic forms, and in the same building. And that fundamentally hurts the mission, and it hurts the people that are allegedly being protected in that context. And so while I have met very well-meaning peacekeepers who try to bring an intersectional perspective to their work, I would not say that the current institutional structure really values or reinforces that intersectional perspective. And I think it's a real missed opportunity and something I hope to see change in the future. Marvi?
I would say that there is, at least from the United Nations Secretary General's perspective, there's a lot of statements coming up on this. So if we take that as leadership statements, leadership policy statements, then technically it should flow down to the bottom. But yeah, in the same way, there wouldn't be, like there's a gender unit, there's no silos, there's no departments perhaps. But the good news is that race is being discussed at the highest levels. Recently, specifically for reasons we all know, for the kind of events that have taken place. And so I'm hoping that will flow down in terms of standard operating procedures as well. But remember one thing, these peacekeeping missions are functioning on ground in conflict zones amidst a lot of violence, etc. So invariably, it's a question of humanity, right? So it's a question of how do they view the people around them? How do they view the local population? Which lens do they use for the local population? And that has a lot to do with, and Roxani is right about the training aspect, it has a lot to do with the training that they receive back home and how they're sent into those missions. Now, if they come with a racial lens, then there will be issues for sure. But if they come minus a racial lens, and then there is training on ground as well. I mean, needless to say, there is some amount of training, I'm sure. But it does depend primarily how they are trained, from where they're coming, and how do they as countries view race and minorities of different types. Because at the end of the day, they are dealing with the vulnerable. So if they have been given a mandate to protect the vulnerable, irrespective of who they are, where they are, which race they belong to, which ethnicity they belong to, they're not part of that. They are outsiders at the end of the day. So they cannot be involved in the mechanics of the racial tensions of the local populations. They better not be, because they are there to serve. They're not there to take, to be unfair to one versus the other. They're there to resolve. They're there to maintain peace, and then also for peace building purposes, like I said, and like Roxani also said, data is very, very important. If you don't have the right data, you will politically make the wrong decisions where to invest. And if you make the wrong decisions where to invest in terms of peace building, ethnicities and ethnic minorities will be compromised at that point. So as long as you're counting them, they need to be counted. I said this at the beginning, they cannot be invisible. As long as they're part of some kind of roster, some kind of household registry, they cannot just be ignored. But a lot of the time, unfortunately, these are nomadic populations, they're IDPs or whatever, and they're moving. And sometimes they get lost in the system. So the idea is specifically not to ensure that they do not get lost in the system, because once they're lost in the system, how are you going to take care of them from a development point of view? How are you going to take care of them from a peace point of view? So perhaps even if the intentions are good, I'm saying the intentions might be great, that yeah, there will be no discrimination. But if you haven't even counted them and you don't know where they exist, and they're not part of your system, how will you service them? So the servicing is important after data management.
Fantastic. This was a truly exciting and enjoyable conversation after a very long week of online conferences and online meetings. It was a pleasure to end on this note, and I'll say that, Marvi, perhaps you need to add an appendix to your book, sort of calling for training for humanity, and suggest that you and Roxani jointly design it and offer it to the UN and other agencies. So I would like to ask everybody sort of to, from the comfort of your own homes and offices, to thank Roxani and Marvi with me. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. It was really amazing. So I see little clappy hands, which I guess is the most we can get. Roxani, thank you for sort of showing Marvi how well we do it within academia. And most of all, thank you, Marvi, for joining us sort of from the comfort of your own home, sort of far away, to share practitioner perspective. And it is amazing how much the two sort of stories actually coalesced, which I think it's a good story to end on. I will thank you both and participants, sort of audience as well. And we will see you, I guess, next semester. So bye-bye for now.